Good morning, folks. Welcome to State College Presbyterian Church this morning. My name is Scott Hoffman. I have the privilege of serving as the senior pastor and head of staff here at State College Presbyterian Church. I want to welcome you on behalf of the congregation as well as our spiritual life committee, Rob and Roger and Linda and Mary Jane and Leanne and Bill and Cheryl, and I'm sure I missed somebody in there, so I apologize for that, who have worked so hard to put this day together. A few announcements to share with you before we get underway this morning. Be sure that you have a program for the day so you can follow along with what we're doing. Those were available at registration. We have a few copies that are in what we call the back, which is kind of the middle of the sanctuary, so you can grab those as well. That information is also found on our website. We have a web page dedicated to today, and you can find the information for today's schedule and those sorts of things on that as well. So be sure you have one of those, or at least can access it online so you can follow along. If you did not already register at the registration table downstairs, we invite you to do that at one of the breaks, just so we can make sure that we've got everybody here and we get your information in case we want to send anything out after this as well. Very importantly, maybe most importantly, where are the restrooms in this building? If you head out the door that is to my left or your right at that middle part of the sanctuary where Roger's kind of waving, head down the hallway. We have restrooms down the hallway just before you get to it at the end or at the end. There is a single-person restroom to the right, the second right after you pass the stairs, if you would like to use that restroom as well. So you can make use of those if you need to. Refreshments are available in Social Hall. You can make your way to those during the breaks or at any time. And we will be serving lunch after the second session today as well. And even if you did not register, you are welcome to stay for lunch today. So please join us for some table fellowship during that time. If you have not already been to Social Hall, it is below us or out through the hallways and follow them around. The elevator is out that direction. That will get you to all the levels of the church, including the Social Hall. So that way you can find your way down there. Byron Borger is here. There's Byron in the back from Hearts and Minds that we are able to hold this weekend free of charge for participants. So a big thank you to the Henszey family and to that legacy that continues to be a gift to this congregation and to the larger community. And again, I want to thank our Spiritual Life Committee that I already mentioned earlier, as well as our Church Secretary, Laura Green, who put together all of the materials, and our custodial staff, Todd and Chelsea, who did a lot of work setting up for us as well. Those are the announcements that I have, so enough of me. Let's get to the reason that we're all here. Brian McLaren is with us today. Brian McLaren is Associate Professor of Architecture at the University of Washington. The broad focus of his concerns have been on the relationship between architecture and politics during the fascist period in Italy, with particular attention to the tensions that link modernism and regional expression. Sorry, that's a different Brian McLaren, it turns out. I think I Googled the wrong guy. In all seriousness, there is a Brian McLaren who is those things, by the way. The Brian McLaren who's with us today, though, is an author, a preacher, a man with a passion for deep thinking and engagement, a husband, a father, and a grandfather, and a fly fisherman, at least as of yesterday as well. You likely already know a lot about him and or could certainly read more about him on his website or any number of other sites on the web. But today he is here to teach us, to inspire us, and to engage with us as we think through how to live and be faithful in these troubling times. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Brian McLaren.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Can I just tell you, I have friends here who I was a teenager with back in the middle of the last century. And there are folks here who are part of the church that I was a pastor, where I served as pastor in the DC area. And then I'm bumping into old friends. Couldn't be happier to be with you all. All of you who are with us online, we're happy that you can be virtually with us as well. And can I just say, you all don't understand the real important person here is Byron Borger, who was mentioned, who's running the bookshop down there. Great booksellers are, and Byron is maybe the best in the country. So please do not let him pack up any inventory when this is over. But such a wonderful partner for somebody who's a writer. We'll talk, I'll talk for 40 minutes or so, then we'll open it up for questions. We'll have a lot of questions, a lot of chances for interaction. And I thought just to get the interaction going, I'm going to try something that's a little risky, but we're going to get good at it because we're going to do it in each of our sessions. I'm going to have you introduce yourself to the people around you in just a minute. But the question is, once we get people talking, how do we get people back together? So I'm going to give you a very simple thing. You know how in many churches they sing Amen for the musicians here? They go from a 4-chord to a 1-chord. Let's try that. But instead of saying Amen, we're going to say hello, all right? So we'll sing hello. Try that. Hello. Now, those of you who know some harmony, you can give us the 4-chord on the first syllable. Ready? Hello. Oh my goodness. 3 times as loud. That sounds so good. Ready? Hello. So that's the cue. I'm going to start singing hello, and that will be your signal. Finish the sentence you're on, sing, and sit down, okay? So would you stand up and find 3 people around you, introduce yourself, and then we'll pull back together. Let's pull back together. Hello. 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 Everyone? Hello. Hello. One more time. Fantastic. We're going to talk in this first session about our current situation. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about my Grandpa Smith, who was born in 1893 or 1894, I've forgotten which. He was the guy I looked up to. I have this haunting feeling as I get older because I remember the look of my grandfather's hands when I was a little boy. They just looked so old and a little scary, and now exactly like my hands, you know. But I revered him. He was funny. He always had a joke. He was very religious, and some of his jokes were borderline in that world. He had false teeth, and he would take them out for the grandkids, which was creepy and funny. And every year I grew up a few hours north of here in southwestern New York, a little town called Olean, New York. And my grandfather lived up in Rochester. And every year in about February, the cold and the gloom got too great. So my parents would load my brother and I up in our Pontiac Sky Chief car, and we would drive down to Florida for a week, and my grandparents came with us. And I have a memory of being in Central Florida sitting at the window. I'm pretty sure I was at one window and my brother was at the other with the grandparents in between to keep us separated. You know how that goes. And for the first time in my life, I saw something you are familiar with here in Pennsylvania, a little oil pump jack, or pump jack is, I guess, the right term. And I just remember seeing this thing going up and down and thinking, what is that? And I said to my grandpa, what is that? And he said, oh, that's called a pump jack. It pumps oil out of the ground, and we use that oil to make the car that's helping us drive here right now. And the first question that popped into my mind was, what happens when they pump out all the oil? And I realized at that moment that my grandfather and I were in two different worlds. For my grandfather, he never had a passport. He only left the state of New York a couple of times, besides when he would go with us to Florida. He had grown up as a vegetable huckster. He and his dad had a horse-drawn carriage or cart that they would drive through Rochester and sell lettuce and carrots and potatoes. And for my grandfather, the world was immensely huge. And so what he said to me reflected both his theology and his sense of how big the earth was. He said, oh, Brian, that will never happen. There's so much oil in the ground, that will never happen. Besides, the Lord put enough for us to last for us till the second coming of Christ. It's very sincere spiritually, but it reflected his theology and, you might say, his geology. This huge earth. I was, at the time, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old, and we were just having satellites go up into space and take pictures of the earth. And it wouldn't be long until we had astronauts on the moon taking pictures of the earth. And for me, the earth was this little blue and white sphere in space. And it didn't seem big at all. It seemed somewhat small, and I could visualize it. And I knew if you suck stuff out of a sphere, it goes empty. And that difference in two different ways of seeing the world persists until this day. There are a lot of people who, when they think of the earth, they think of it as being so big that we can pump all the pollution that we want to into it, and it will be able to absorb it. And we can suck out all the resources that we want, and there will still be more. And many of us, we live in an economic system and a political system that tries to keep us thinking that way, because our entire system runs on the assumption that we could never pump out too many pollutants and we could never suck out too many resources. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Underneath all of our political arguments, which are many and deep and profound, I think we have fundamentally two different ways of seeing life on our planet. And my grandfather had one. He was a good man. He just, that's the way he saw the world. And I was a little boy, and I haven't been able to stop seeing the world that way ever since. When you go through the process of seeing the world in a new way, it's not an easy thing. And for many of us, we've already been through this journey, but for some of us, I just want to be sensitive. Things I'm going to say today are going to take you places you might never have been before. There's a letting go process where you let go of assumptions about how things work. And you don't let go of them easily. We're all very tightly, we have a deep affection for our assumptions. Then there's a letting be process where you let it settle in that maybe the world isn't the way you always thought it was. And you spend long enough in that letting be process, and then there's a letting come process where new ideas, new ways of seeing become possible. You couldn't have seen what you now see if you hadn't lost some of those assumptions that you let go of. And let yourself settle in that unknowing and uncertainty. And then you're set free for whatever the next set of journeys might be. So that letting go involves dropping our defenses against a reality we didn't ask for so we can more accurately see our current situation. Now, when I wrote this book that I'll be touching on today, Life After Doom, if I could go back, here's what I would do differently on the cover. I would have life after in really big letters, and then I'd have doom in really small letters, because the word doom scares the liver out of people. When I am using the term doom, I'm using it not as the end of the space-time universe or something like that, but as the feeling that comes when we realize that our problems have grown bigger than our solutions. Or another way to say it, it's the feeling that comes when we start to realize that our solutions are part of the problem. Or you could say, with psychologists, doom is a feeling of fright without escape, because when your problems are bigger than your solutions, and your solutions are part of your problems, it can be a very, very disorienting thing. In the book I wrote, doom is a kind of pre-traumatic stress disorder that arises when our old normal is deteriorating and no new normal has come into view. For our purposes, doom isn't a single catastrophic event at some point in the future. Instead, it is the emotional and intellectual experience shared by all who realize the dangerous future into which we are presently plunging ourselves, our descendants, and our fellow creatures. I'll tell you something. We're talking about this in 2025. We could go back 1,000 years, and everything I'm going to say to you today would have been true. It just would have had a longer timeline on it. We could go back 2,000 years. We could go back 3,000 years. We're on a trajectory we've been on for a very, very long time. And we're now at a point where the earth has got small enough in our view that we can see it when we couldn't see it before. I would define our current situation maybe in these 5 categories. I started them all with the letter P, which shows you I used to be a preacher. Planet, peace, power, profit, and purpose or meaning. I think our deepest challenge is a problem of purpose. I'm sorry, a problem of the planet. Purpose is big too, but a problem of the planet. We live in a condition called overshoot. Overshoot is what my grandfather and I were seeing that day. It means we're sucking out more resources than the earth can replenish, and we're pumping out more toxins, pollutants, and so on than the earth can detoxify. That simple idea, once you see it, you can never unsee it. Once you understand it, that we live on a finite planet, a whole lot of things start making sense, and a lot of other things stop making sense. If you understand overshoot, every political and economic message that presents economic growth as the solution to our problems looks ridiculous. When growth creates problems and you make it the solution to your problem, you accelerate the problem. Overshoot is a far-reaching challenge, and we're going to grapple with what that means on many levels today. Second, how do we seek peace with one another? And we human beings have this deep problem of getting along with each other. And we have many ways of coping with getting along. My personal belief is one of the ways we've learned to get along with each other over the last 150 or 200 years is by making everybody richer through fossil fuels. And by making everybody richer through fossil fuels, we were too busy getting rich to be as violent with one another as we very often like to be. We might see what happens when that process of growth stumbles and falls, and then we're going to have to face the problem of how we get along with each other, how we deal with our inner stability. And our most popular way of achieving peace over the last several thousand years has been through domination. Put some powerful people with powerful weapons in charge, and they'll keep the rest of us in check. Third is and by the way, that's has been our modus operandi for a long time. The problem is when you have more and more weapons, many of our countries have more guns than they have people. When you have more and more weapons, and then you increase the kill power of your weapons, and especially when you throw nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons into the mix, when that happens, this method of achieving peace becomes increasingly likely to tip over into mutually assured destruction. Some of you remember, well, I suppose many of you in this room remember when September 11th, 2001 happened, and there was that, we were all watching the television and wondering what was going to happen next. I was a pastor in the Washington, D.C. area, and people who didn't live in D.C., probably many of them don't even remember this, but we do. We had the anthrax scare. You remember that? Right at that same time. And a member of my congregation had spent his whole career, he was a high-level government official whose specialty was biological weapons. And he'd spent his entire career studying biological weapons and trying to figure out how we could keep them from being deployed. And I was at his home a few nights after September 11th for a leadership meeting for the church. And I said to him, this anthrax thing is a big deal. And literally, he burst into tears in his kitchen. I've spent my whole life hoping this day would never come. And then he went on to tell me, he said, listen, normal people have no idea the weapons that could be unleashed upon us at any moment. And I just remember a shiver going up my spine that day, thinking, getting a feel for this second problem. When you achieve peace through competing domination structures, all of whom have enormous weapons, that's a big challenge. How we distribute power. And in this country, we've had waves of moving from democracy to oligarchy, democracy to oligarchy. I know it's hard to imagine a world where the richest people might show up in the White House, but when you put together the world's richest people with the people who have power over all of those weapons and armies and all the rest, that's a way of distributing power that could go wrong in many, many different ways. And add to that how we define profit. Those wealthy people who have inordinate power, it's not just the power of their money, it's that the power of their money buys them political power through bribery, through campaign donations, through now, I know it's hard to imagine where the world's richest people would buy social media platforms, where they could monitor and adjust the algorithms of social media that might give them twice or 5 or 10 or 20 or 200 times the influence of a normal person on that platform. But you start to see, when you put these different challenges together, that one of individually hoarded wealth, where more and more wealth goes to a smaller and smaller percentage of super elites. And you define profit. The success in life is accumulating money. What could go wrong with that? That was cynical, by the way. And then the deepest question, perhaps of all, what's our purpose? Why are we here? What's the meaning of this life? Is there anything in our deepest purpose that could help us address those first 4 problems? But here's where it gets tricky. Because when those same super wealthy people who are winning at the game of profit and are expanding their profit and expanding their power, when they're the ones giving money to religious organizations, the religious organizations that should be able to give us some bigger perspective find out that they're not allowed to do that because their donors won't like it. When you put that set of challenges together, you understand what I mean by our current situation. A lot of experts are calling it a polycrisis or a multi-crisis, where each of those problems makes the other problems harder to solve. But here's the thing. That first problem of overshoot is the problem that will accelerate the tension in all those other areas. A lot of people now have come to fully understand that we're in trouble with overshoot ecologically. But we could say, and some people are saying, humans don't have an ecological problem, the earth has a human problem. But I don't want to just say that humans are the problem, because in doing that, it plays into an assumption that I think we need to let go of on our way down that U-shaped journey. And the assumption is this: here's human nature, and here are the set of institutions, economics, politics, religious assumptions. Let's call this our current culture. And we have human nature and our current culture deeply, deeply intertwined. And I think one of the things that I hope that can happen today, I personally think this is at the core of what's best about Christianity and every other religious tradition at its best, is that that our deepest religious traditions tell us that it's possible for human nature to be extracted from the assumptions of any given culture and to be set free to think and live in new and different ways. And so this is really, I think, one of the challenges that we face that I think through the course of today will become clearer, that we human beings have a civilizational problem. We built a global economy, global interconnected political, communication, educational, business systems working around the world that are propelling us into that polycrisis. And we need some distance. We need to get some breathing room. Nobody that I've ever come across has better expressed this deep element of our crisis than a 20th century Roman Catholic thinker, professor, philosopher, Catholic priest. I would call him a theologian. I would say I think he's one of the most important theologians of the last 500 years. I think he's probably way more important, should be more important to every Protestant than Martin Luther. And if I can say it in a Presbyterian church, John Calvin too. And almost many people have not heard of Father Thomas Berry. I hesitate to call him a theologian because he didn't like that word. He changed the name. He called it geologian, putting together study of the earth with his theological background, because he felt that the way we think of God is hurting the way we're thinking of the earth. And here's what Thomas Berry said. He had these 3 sentences that he repeated all the time. So here's our current situation in 3 sentences. First, the glory of the human has become the desolation of the earth. Do you feel that? This glorious civilization we've built. We have high-powered computers we bring with us everywhere. We can get on a plane in one part of the world in the morning and fall asleep on the other side of the world that night. What an amazing world. We have a world in which Bob Dylan and Beyonce can be known around the world. We have an incredible world this glorious world is desolating the earth. The desolation of the earth, second, is becoming the destiny of the human. When you destroy your home, your one and only home, you don't have a bright future. And listen, I'll just tell you, I've been working on a science fiction trilogy. The first one comes out this summer, and it's about a voyage to Mars. But look, can I just tell you, in spite of all the science fiction out there, Mars is not a place where you're going to find a good home. The desolation of the earth, our one and only home, means that as the earth can provide less and less stability for us, every other problem we face gets more difficult. It's harder to grow food. It's harder to deal with migration. It's harder to deal with political stress when more and more people are hungry. It's when people are having to move because the sea level is rising. Sea level rise seems like such a distant problem. I live on the Gulf of Mexico, is how I like to refer to it. And I've lived there for 16 years. And the Gulf of Mexico rises 1/8 of an inch per year. And when I think that in the time I've lived there, the sea level has risen 2 inches, suddenly that becomes measurable, something I can visualize. And so the desolation of the earth is becoming the destiny of the human. And all human institutions, professions, programs, and activities must now be judged primarily by the extent to which they inhibit, ignore, or foster a mutually enhancing human-earth relationship. And if you want to remember a great phrase, mutually enhancing human-earth relationship, a new relationship with the earth becomes deeply, deeply important. And so people think, well, you're talking about the possibility of ecological collapse. Yes, that's what we're talking about. But here's the thing. Long before ecological collapse happens, we'll experience a civilizational collapse because our civilization is developed to function within a very narrow margin of environmental change. And so people who are concerned about these things are paying a lot of attention to going back in history and understanding how civilizations grow and plateau and decline. And people who study this sort of thing say when civilizations grow, their growth creates problems, but when they solve those problems, they continue growing. Some problems, though, cost more to solve than the civilization can afford, and some problems prove unsolvable at any reasonable price. And the problems may be internal or the problems may be external. Probably the civilization that has been studied most in its rise and fall is the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire had hundreds of years of problems that it solved, but then solving the problems became so expensive that the empire began to bankrupt itself in trying to keep solving and maintain the solutions to those problems. And then it took a couple of problems, but one of them was things were bad in the Roman Empire, but they were much worse to the north and to the northwest and the northeast. And when a lot of those people outside the empire had even less than the people in the empire, and they were desperate and hungry, they were willing to do anything to try to survive. And so people started moving in, and some very, very clever military strategists figured out how to exploit the weaknesses of the empire until a succession of invaders, Goths and Visigoths and so on, came in and sacked Rome a couple of times. And so that was a problem that they didn't have the resources to solve. Third, when a civilization can no longer solve the problems it faces, it stops growing and becomes vulnerable to collapse. The civilization unravels and declines in cohesion, wealth, power, and complexity, and its population increases either suddenly or more often in a stair-step fashion. Things get worse. You think, well, at least that's over, and then they get worse. And you think, well, it couldn't get any worse, and then they get worse. I have a feeling if we were having this conversation 30 years ago, I would have seemed like a nutcase to a lot of you. Not me today, but I have a feeling that because of what we see going on in the world in the last 10 years or so, a lot of what I'm saying now doesn't seem like some crazy conspiracy theory, but we start to see, oh yeah, that pattern would apply to our civilization just as much as the civilizations in the past. And that's a lot that I've given you to think about. I understand there's a lot of letting go to think about, and a lot of letting be, and a lot of letting come before we can be set free. And so that is my short summary of our current situation. And now we have plenty of time for some questions. And the way we're going to do questions is, if you would like, if a couple brave people would go first, it'll make it easier for everybody else. We have a mic up here, and the reason it's right up here in the middle is we want the people who are watching online to be able to see you ask the question, and then I'll try to respond. So we'll start a little queue up here. So we'll have a batter and somebody on deck, to use a sports analogy, and can have a couple people on deck if you'd like. And then for people who can't get up, we'll have someone walking around with a mic, and you'll need to sort of wave your hand and get their attention when you see someone with the mic. And so we'd like to open it up for some questions now and comments. And I won't be offended at all if you want to challenge or disagree with something I've said, or if you want to ask for something more granular. We can go in any of those directions. So, who'd like to go first? It's okay to have a couple moments to let the questions rise up. See what you'd like to talk about. Thank you so much. And if you'll say your name, that would be great.
Hey there, my name is Danielle. I'll be the guinea pig. So
thank you, Danielle.
So my spouse saw a study reported yesterday where they did a survey of pastors around the country. 90% of pastors agree that climate change is caused by humans,
yes,
but only about 15% of them have talked with their congregation about that. Sort of like as we think about that first phase, what advice do you have, especially for spiritual and religious leaders, about how to engage in these really hard conversations with folks? Thank you.
So thank you so much, Danielle. Did you all hear that statistic? I saw that yesterday as well. 90% of clergy think climate change and these related environmental problems are real, but a very small, what is it, 15% have actually ever addressed it in a sermon. Just a quick anecdote about this, Danielle. When I was a pastor, I remember I gave a sermon about these issues in the 90s. And a young woman came up to me afterwards who was a student at the local university, and she said, I'm an environmental studies major. She said, this is the first time I've ever heard a pastor talk about these things in church as a spiritual matter. And she said, that was really impressive, but she said, I noticed you didn't say anything about climate change. That was the first time I had ever heard the term climate change. Actually, she said global warming. It's the first time I'd ever heard the term global warming. And so I said, are you talking about nuclear winter? I'd heard of that. She said, no. She said, you don't know about climate change? And then she said, here's a website. You remember when websites were like, you know how to get onto a website? And she wrote it down for me, and I went and I watched a video of, an animation of the Arctic ice sheet. And of course, every year it shrinks in the summer, and then the Arctic ice sheet shrinks in the summer and then grows in the winter. And I watched it in this animation going like this, but here's what it was really doing. It was going like this. And you could see over, as long as they had records, the maximum and the minimum were both getting smaller. And I remember that was a day for me that I thought, oh man, the world is different than I assumed. And Danielle, there are many dimensions to this, but listen, I'm getting really old, and at my age, you can't beat around the bush, okay? This is where that problem of money, that problem of the power of donors in religious institutions really becomes critical. So because some political parties are more open to talking about climate change, listen, you better be sure, behind the scenes, people in all political parties know we're in trouble. It's just different political strategies of how they want to deal with it. But because this is seen as a political issue, it's a scientific issue, it's a religious issue, it's a theological issue. But it's called political, and so what will happen is if a pastor says something about it, if the pastor's standing at the back of the church, someone's going to, when the pastor goes to shake their hand, other pastors in the room know what I'm talking about. He'll reach to shake the hand. You know you're in trouble when the person grabs your elbow and pulls you in. I didn't appreciate those political comments. And when that's the main donor in the congregation, or one of the top donors in the congregation, you might be brave enough to face it once, but about the fourth time your elbow gets squeezed, your courage is undermined. You know, it's very, very hard. And it's not because pastors are greedy, it's because they're running an organization. And when they run an organization, they think, if that guy stops giving, I have to lay off the organist. And if that family stops giving, we won't be able to pay our, for the leaky roof or whatever. So all of this, the power of money becomes deeply, deeply embedded in this. And I don't want to solve that problem. It's a problem. I think it's part of our current system that is incapable of addressing and facing our problem. I wish I had less experience with this, but I have a lot of experience on both sides. I was a pastor, so I've had the elbow squeezed myself. But also I've been an activist, and I've been involved trying to get religious leaders to speak up about these issues. And I see the powers, the systems that work against it. Maybe I'll add one other thing, Danielle. I actually think, we're going to get into this later in the day, but just in case, I want to give people full freedom to ask any questions about this. I think Christian theology, in its current form, is part of the problem and not part of the solution. This is why Thomas Berry didn't want to be called a theologian anymore. Because when many people think of Christianity, what they think of primarily is an evacuation plan. Their theology tells them the earth is doomed and our only hope is to get transported to heaven. And so what happens is every person who becomes a devout Christian in that theological mindset thinks they're being unfaithful to care about the future of the earth. And you might not have gotten that theology, but I can promise you a whole lot of your neighbors in Center County, that's the theology they will get tomorrow and the Sunday after and the Sunday after. It's an evacuation gospel. Whereas I believe that the gospel, as Jesus taught it, is a transformation gospel. We don't pray, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. May we go to your kingdom after this earth is destroyed or when we die. But we pray, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so I think that's a huge dimension of this. The good news is, if we start paying attention to these matters, we'll find out that's what the Bible has been talking about all along, and we'll find out that that's what Jesus was very concerned about. In fact, yeah, much more we could say, but thanks, Danielle. Yes?
My name is Ken.
Hey, Ken.
I heard you mention the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes.
I don't know where that is. Is that anywhere near the Gulf of America?
Yes, it's one of the aliases for the body of water formerly known. Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Yes. Thanks, Ken.
Hi, my name is Daniel. Thank you so much. So what you just talked about, the theology being the problem, I relate to all that. I come from a background where a lot of people would frame it that care for the world is almost idolatry.
Yes.
But I wonder if you can talk about approaching it as a justice issue.
Yes.
As I think that's very important to sort of shift. Climate justice is social justice as well, and I wonder if you can talk about that.
Oh, Daniel, thanks for that. So let me I'm going to test my short-term memory here. I'm going to get back to that. Let me circle around to it. One of the joys in my life the last 20 years has been a friendship with Father Richard Rohr. Many of you are familiar with him, and many of you probably are here because you heard about this through my connection with the Center for Action and Contemplation. And Richard has a saying that for many years he did work with men. He worked in a men's prison, and he noticed how many of the men in prison had a harmful relationship with their fathers, or their fathers had a harmful relationship with them, and that made him interested in what's wrong with the male psyche. He was certainly not barking up the wrong tree there. As we see in today's world, the male psyche is a mess. Our current civilization doesn't have a good, healthy understanding of what a good man would truly be like. And so Richard tried to work with this. And one of the things he would do when he'd get men together for these men's events is he would just spend a lot of time telling men, you're going to die. And you might think, well, that's pleasant. But he'd remind them, he'd try to help them feel that their time on earth was limited. And his goal was to get men to say, my life is not about me. I'm about life. Now, when we say, my life is not about me, I'm about life, we're usually thinking, I'm about human life. But I'd like to propose, try this on for all of us with a religious background. By the way, let me just say, if you're here with no religious background, you are 100% welcome, and, everybody here is welcome. Doesn't matter what your background is and so on. But if you have a religious background, you remember how the book of Genesis begins? It begins with a couple of naked hunter-gatherers living in a garden. And they're interacting with plants and animals. Their job is to till the earth, meaning you're allowed to get your living from the earth, and to care for it. So their whole life purpose is about their relationship with the earth. Remember what Father Thomas Berry said, that we need a mutually enhancing human-earth relationship. Go back and read Genesis 1 and 2, and that's what you'll see. It's a human-earth relationship. Human beings were about life. Now, the scientific word for that would be human beings were about the biosphere. They were about all of life. And so the reason I wanted to back into your question, which is such a good question, is to say, listen, it would be a big step for us to move ahead from thinking of ourselves to thinking of the well-being of humanity. But I don't think that's enough, because there's no well-being for humanity until we think about the well-being of the biosphere. There's no healthy human beings if there isn't a healthy biosphere. But within that biosphere, then we think about the well-being of humanity, and we start thinking, what will it take to produce real human thriving? Especially for those of us who are Christians, who are called to love our neighbor as ourselves. And when Jesus makes it absolutely clear that your neighbor includes the neighbor of another race, another religion, another gender, another social class, and all of the other ways that we divide us from them. So social justice then becomes a way of thinking ecologically about human beings. Now, when I say ecologically, ecology is about balance. Different creatures have to live in balance with one another. If the lions kill all the gazelles, the lions will die. So the well-being of lions doesn't mean they hate gazelles and want to eat them all. Obviously, I don't know how much thinking about this. I don't know about economics programs in lion universities. But on some instinctual level, lions don't kill more than they eat, right? There's a balance that's built into them. And we human beings have to learn to respect that balance of power among human beings. And this is what we're struggling with in our world on this very day. And there are going to be people out in the streets around the country, in this country today, who are trying to say, we think the balance is run amok. We got to get this balance back together. And so a wonderful way to think about social justice is to think about it as balance of power. Because one way to define injustice is an imbalance of power. It's power improperly used. Now, when you say, well, what's proper? And that's where we have to think about the right balances to keep the whole working in a beautiful and good way. That's probably, there's so much more we could say about that. Last thing I'll say, and then we have time for a couple more questions. If you think of it this way, justice among humans is deeply, deeply important. It depends on justice with the environment at large, health in the ecology at large. Because if it gets too hot, or there's too much rain, or there are too many fires, or the sea level rises too much too fast, people suffer. They can't eat. They have to move somewhere else. And that creates all kinds of justice-oriented problems. So social justice and economic justice are inseparable. They're both important, and they both involve a different way of seeing the earth than most of us were ever taught by anybody. 2 more questions, and then we'll take our break.
Good morning. I'm Dave.
Hey, Dave.
I'm in my 2nd semester seminary, and the elbow grab is probably one of the biggest reasons I really don't want to pastor a church when I'm done. What advice would you have, if you could redesign the church? What would be a way to enable pastors to speak truth to power and preach what needs preached instead of and not preaching to offend the money givers?
Yes. So, well, thanks, Dave. I feel like you just went right to the heart of the matter in this, Dave. I'm just a little distracted because you're seeing my desktop, which is just always an embarrassing thing. And I just cleaned it up the other day, so if it looks bad, it's way better than it was. So Dave, I think we are in a unique situation as Americans. The Christian religion has played an enormous role in the United States. It's played an enormous positive role and an enormous negative role, and we have to be able to hold those two together. If you only talk about the positive and you aren't allowed to talk about the negative, you get in trouble in one way. If you only talk about the negative and never the positive, you get in trouble in another way. So I wonder if we can non-dually hold both the harm that has been done by the Christian religion and the help that's been given by the Christian religion. Holding those two together, I think, it's not just a matter of fairness, it's a matter of honesty and accuracy. But think about it. This religion in this country gave permission for the white ancestors of most of us in this room to take the lands of the original inhabitants and think it was our God-given right to do it. We used the Bible to justify the slaughter of the native peoples. We used the Bible to justify the taking of their lands. It was, and every time you hear a person say American exceptionalism, they might not know this, but that is a new term to replace an old term, which was manifest destiny. And manifest destiny was a term that emerged from a teaching in the Catholic, actually from a papal encyclical from the 1450s, reiterated and expanded in the 1490s, that was called the Doctrine of Discovery, that basically said it's God's will for the white European Christian church to rule the world. And it can steal anything it wants to steal and take anything it wants to take and enslave anybody it wants to enslave. And this was a Catholic doctrine that Protestants, in fact, I think you could make a case, we've got some scholars in the room who could explore this, that one of the reasons the Protestant Reformation took off the way it did is it gave Northern European Christians the chance to go exploit the world using the doctrine of discovery and never have to pay a royalty to Rome. And this was an ugly doctrine that then was expanded to legitimize the enslavement, the kidnapping and enslavement of 13 million people of African descent. This religion that you're in seminary to study, and because it's brought blessing and meaning to your life, this religion was used to justify. And we could go on and on. We could talk about how it's been justified to exploit the earth itself. And so one of the best reasons to be in seminary is to say, I have to face this heritage. I have to face this history. And in facing this history, I have to make sure to help the Christian religion turn away from that history so it will never do these horrible things in the name of God and Jesus and the Bible again. And when that's clear in your mind, if that's essential to your sense of vocation, then here's what I think will happen. You'll be generous and gentle and kind to everyone in your congregation. But when you clearly teach that to be a follower of Jesus is incompatible with a careless attitude toward the poor, toward neighbors of other faiths, races, religions, and so on, and toward the earth, when that's very, very clear, people will either come along with you or they'll decide to go be part of another congregation that will help them maintain their current way of thinking. And that's not a failure on your part. That's clarity on your part. You've united people with a common sense of vision. And here's what I think you'll find. In fact, this is where we're going to go in our third session later today. I think you will find, Dave, in your own ministry, that there will be some people who leave, but you'll find out that more and more people will say, I've been waiting for there to be a place that would tell the truth about what's going on. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being such a place. I have a friend who is a retired pastor, and he was asked recently to give a lecture at a local state university in California, secular university. I guess it was for some religious studies class, and he was known as a progressive Christian, so they said, will you come and talk about progressive Christianity? He came and gave his lecture, and I watched it online. And he's just the nicest guy, and he gave his talk, and it's one of those lectures where the seats are, elevated, a big lecture hall. And as soon as he was done, you would have thought it was a Billy Graham crusade where he had just given one of those altars, remember those altar calls? All these students come down the aisle and surround him down on the front floor. It was like, we never knew there was such a thing as a kind of Christianity that cared about the earth and cared about the poor and cared about breaking down these barriers. We never knew that was like, where can we find one of those, And it may be that in the coming years, that sense of disillusionment with what has been could lead to the time that you're showing up for seminary for such a time as this. We have one more question, and then it will be time for our break.
My name is Scott Kretschmar, a member of this church, and recently a lay pastor in a nearby church. I wanted to push a little bit more on the issue that came up earlier about how difficult it is for the institutional church to exercise leadership. I've had my elbow twisted and pushed and so forth, so I understand the difficulty. So I wonder if we're moving in a direction where the large institutional churches either not useful or going to be less useful in the future, and that Christianity will be moving more towards smaller group kinds of formats rather than large group formats as we have here. And the second question is, as we sit here today, we are isolated from nature. We have walls that keep us from seeing the trees and so forth. And we go to church means we go out of nature in a sense when we go to our cathedrals and beautiful churches like this one. Shouldn't we be worshiping outdoors?
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Yes. When we come indoors, it should be teaching us to appreciate the beautiful creation of God, the sacred temple of creation, so that when we walk out the doors, whatever alleluias we said inside become alleluias outside. Maybe not literally, but where everything we learn inside sends us back out to encounter God in creation and God in our neighbor. If our theology was working as it should, that's what would happen. This will really be the main topic of our last session today, and so I think I'll come back to it then. And you just inspired me. I'm going to pick a couple of slides and stick them in my talk for my last session based on what your question. Thank you very much. Do we have instructions for our break? Thanks, everybody, for your attention, and we'll pick up.
Thank you, Brian. You are free to stretch your legs, use the restroom, pop back down to social hall to grab any refreshments that you'd like as well. And then we will meet back in this space. The time is, what's the next session? 11 o'clock. So you've got some time, and you can greet one another, and we will walk around and announce that it's time, you have 5 or 10 minutes or so to get back into this space. Have a good break.